We're back, people. Week 2, episode 2 of season 3 of Succession recap entitled Mass in Times of War. It's funny because I thought that I thought for a second that the title said Mass in Times of War, but I guess it is just a singular time of war. I don't know. That's a bad joke. I mean, I don't know. Did the sit down scene between them feel like Mass?
No, not
All right.
really. Not
All
to
right.
me. No.
Yeah. That's just one of the few things we're going to be talking about. There was a lot to talk about, but also like not a lot to talk about, if that makes any sense. All this and more coming up on this episode of the Succession recap show. Yeah, Dustin, I was just going to run that through with you before we started. Like, do you think we need an official title for this or no? This is just the Succession recap segment. I just realized I probably should have read that through with you before we got this started.
It's not a big deal. We can just call it the Succession recap.
All right. Well, we're on episode 2 right now. It's entitled Mass in Times of War. I rewatched this episode. This is definitely an episode where it's kind of like a lot of typical second episodes where it's kind of like stringing you along, setting up the pace for like what's going to come still. We're like, okay, we still have yet to be in the thick of it, right? But the characters are like kind of sliding into their positions, at least where they're going to sit out like the first half of this coming conflict, right? You have this massive coming together of the Roy siblings with Kendall summoning all the Roy siblings together in one spot in order to discuss their future war plans. We have Stewie back. We have the introduction of a few new characters. Greg is forced to make a couple of big decisions ultimately. Logan makes a couple of big decisions. Dustin, what were your initial thoughts after watching this episode?
Yet another satisfying hour of drama and comedy blended to perfection, directed by one of the best television directors of the last maybe all time. Mark Mylod has directed some of the best episodes, and while this might not be one of the best episodes of Succession, it still just maintains that energy and that palpable, through line. It's just so good. I just love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark Mylod is a director I've been following for a little bit now. Obviously, directed some of my favorite episodes of Game of Thrones. And yeah, the guy definitely knows what he's doing as far as that goes. I mean, it just goes back to the creative team and just how they're able to what the kind of style and energy that they're able to inject into it. This is something that I wanted to get into last week that we didn't really get a chance to, which is like the thing that like the camera team specifically is able to capture on this show that like maybe a lot of people don't realize as far as what gives it a lot of the energy is the fact that like because they've got so many cameras, but like they're on like the spinning zoom rigs constantly, it like allows them to focus on all the different characters kind of interacting in a way that like normal television shows wouldn't, because most of the time is right, it's just like a simple 2-shot, and then for like big group shots you'll like have a bunch of cameras hanging overhead and you might have one camera following people around, but that's really it. It's you mostly just have like the close-ups that just like show all the different like spaces in zoom. With this, what they do is they're literally just, they'll sometimes have like one, maybe 2 cameras in a room, and they're constantly just zipping around, cutting in between characters. And none of the actors have talked about this in interviews. They never know when the camera is going to be on them. So they have to be on like at all times. And I don't know about you, but that just sounds like a great way to like consistently keep them engaged and keep them in character and make sure that they never miss a beat, never miss a rhythm. It's like a totally different way of like shooting that, quite frankly, like I'm super into. Like I feel like it's the first time that we can like since Game of Thrones that we can really talk about like the work that like the cinematography team plays in this, because it's like very few other just TV shows in general, even a lot of the new ones, really have a lot of that going for them, you know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And it's just the editing. Maybe maybe this started with Adam McKay and The Big Short or whatever, but like just the fact that it kind of stemmed from there, or maybe documentaries before then, to like now, or maybe the camera shows like the sitcoms that we love, like The Office and Parks and Rec. Like it kind of harkens back to that, but like in a hyper realistic kind of setting. And I don't know, it just makes it beyond fresh for television.
Yeah, absolutely. That's funny that you bring up The Office, actually, because it's like, I
Mhm.
always wondered kind of like where the evolution of like, obviously the mockumentary became such a staple of the sitcom world that it essentially like kind of replaced the traditional like 3-camera setup. Like what was the last mainstream one that people, I know obviously the Big Bang Theory was still big for years, but like How I Met Your Mother was like the last, I feel
How I
like,
Met Your Mother.
relevant one, like because Two and a Half Men kind of
Mom.
fizzled. Mom, that's true. Do people still watch Mom? Even I know that
No, I
ended
think it
last year.
ended, but like it was going strong. What was it like on its 7th or
It was
8th
on its
season?
8th season, something like that. It went for like the big 8.
There's your answer.
I don't know how shows could ever go for
And
that
Will
long
and
if they're not like
Grace
Game of
was
Thrones.
got a revival, and that was on for a few
True. But
years.
like,
And that,
the point is that style now has kind of become
Mhm.
antiquated, and whenever it's in shows now, they kind of use it as like a joke. But like the whole evolution of kind of like the snap zoom, quick cut documentary feeling like that, I always wondered like kind of where that was going to evolve from The Office and Parks and Rec. And it's so interesting to essentially see that now it's on like arguably the best show on the air right now. I wouldn't say the most mainstream, but like easily the best show on the air, and kind of like how it's added that quick wit zoom energy to it. It's like I feel like that's kind of the other like underlying factor in addition to the writing that I feel like not a lot of people are focusing on when it comes to the show, because it really is engaging. Because you take an episode like this, which is comprised even more so than the last one. I know a lot of critics have been talking about, okay, of all the episodes that may have been influenced by the COVID restrictions, this may have been the obvious one. And yeah, sure, I can see that. But talk about making the best of just limited space and limited exposure. Just like there are like 3 or 4 actual like set locations in this place, and like a couple shots in cars. That's about it. Maybe like one shot of like Greg walking down the street. But like this really did feel more like a confined, closeted like play, more than like, I guess, like a typical episode of Succession. Not that took away from the quality, but like if anything, it kind of like added a new layer of what we've come to expect from this show.
yes, absolutely. Like it doesn't veer too far away from it. I wouldn't call this show the most like adventurous show in the world, but it keeps you glued to the characters just because of how great and magnetic the dialogue and performances are. And it's the fact that it's just kind of contained that way, and it kind of contains itself in this world, it kind of brings you even in closer to what the world they're trying to portray for these like rich elites, where it's just like it really like you're seeing something you're maybe not supposed to be seeing, and that's the kind of intimate feel I get from this show.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to use that kind of as a transition into what actually happens in the episode, because even
Hmm.
though it's another episode that had like relatively few kind of set piece locations, it still had, I feel like, just a lot going within all those scenes. Like obviously starting with the opening scene where Kendall's talking to Greg, and automatically like the one-liners are out. It's like, wow, so we came off Kendall in last episode. He was so fired up, he was so reared up, he was so ready to go. And I feel like throughout the course of this episode, the thing that's established is, okay, Kendall still may not have all of his faculties together. His kind of self-destructive nature may already trying to be getting the better of him. Ultimately, like he automatically think like Greg is just a little bit hesitant. He's like, "Oh, you Judasing me, Greg? You Judasing me?" It's like he's already starting to get paranoid of those around him, and it kind of sets up Greg for his journey on this episode. Right, the whole big theme of this episode is the coming together of the Roy siblings and the ultimate, I feel like, kind of unraveling of Kendall's big grand plan, ultimately. Because the last episode, Kendall was so fired up, he was so ready to go,
Hmm.
and ultimately it shows that like he may have been completely half-cocked here. He shows once again, he's trying to kind of use this projection, I feel, in order to like continue to feign some sort of connection and interest to his siblings. But I don't know, like Kendall kind of has no reason to go to his siblings here, but at the same time he does, because he does note, as do a lot of other people this episode, that kind of the siblings have the combined do have the potential to take down Logan ultimately.
Well, they do, and that's why he's doing it. I mean, he does care about his siblings to a certain degree. I mean, he does want to be the one on top, obviously, but he still wants to bring them in to take down the dad because he knows that's what it takes. But I think, we'll end up talking about this more, but I think he ends up kind of losing his cool just because of how selfish the other kids are in his mind. And we'll talk about that later. But still,
Yeah.
it gets into really interesting conversations and dynamics, and like a certain thing that happens near the very end involving donuts
Yeah,
that kind of had my eyes rolling just because of what certain characters do. But Kendall's reaction is just great. So
the fact that the crux of like the decision making that comes from the other Roy siblings revolves around pastries, and that's kind of like a weird underlying running theme throughout this episode. Kind of has me laughing.
No, yeah.
Just as far as it's like, wow, so Logan is that powerful that even some fucking donuts are like enough to like send the siblings into a Quaker. Also, I just wanted to point out, like, quick creative fact, like Alan Ruck has a much bigger part in this episode than he did in the last episode, and a much bigger part than I thought
we
he was
didn't
going to
talk
coming
about
off the
Alan
last
Ruck. we didn't talk about Alan Ruck the last time, which I forgot about. I wanted to talk about him, but he wasn't really in the first
Right.
episode that much. But this episode, yeah, he's
He's in a
definitely
lot.
in it more. He's definitely in it more, and I think that performance is very underrated as well. And I hope he gets to do more this season as well, because he is kind of like a goofy motherfucker, but he's also like vaguely kind of like the soul of the Roy siblings, at least, or maybe the Roy family, because he's definitely the nicest out of the siblings. But like he's, even though we've seen some of that cutthroat edge of his, when he was talking to the wait staff, what was it in last season?
Yeah,
And that was
well,
great.
no, first season, but yeah,
Or yeah, that was
for
first
me,
season.
this is top 3 Alan Ruck performances just in general across the entire show, like the individual performances as Connor that he's given. Because like Connor, when he was brought into the show, was kind of one of those characters that like, obviously felt like he could be a nothing character. Like he's not one of the main ones that you're introduced to within the first couple of minutes. He kind of almost like would almost blend in and be a background character, if not for the fact that it's like, oh, that's Alan Ruck, that's that's Cameron from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And then as the show goes on and as the first season goes on, he's consistently kind of like the really awesome background player that like you can almost kind of like enjoy watching, because he's the only one that's like really not involved in the action.
He was also in The Happening with Jeremy Strong.
That's right. Ironically enough, that was their first couple in together. I still love them, dude. When I watched that movie earlier this year for the Shyamalan
Cheese
ranking
and Crackers,
that I did,
yeah.
that I almost did a double take. I'm like, wow, hey man, everyone's got to start somewhere.
I love Cheese and Crackers.
Oh my god,
I love
ridiculous.
that.
Absolutely ridiculous, that movie. I loved it. I loved every single minute of it. I'm like,
movie.
okay, the people who hate this do not understand, even though Shyamalan didn't even understand what he was going for, and that's what makes it even funnier. But anyways, I think that kind of what Alan Ruck brings in this episode specifically, in addition to kind of his performance as Connor, kind of sums up like his character in the Gambit, which is, again, he is still a goofball. He doesn't really know what's going on. He just came off of literally an entire campaign of like, okay, he was running for president, which he may or may not still being. And just the fact that like like Kendall is trying to give this big dysfunctional spew of utter jargon about where they could go in the future and what they're going to bring to the company, that their dad kind of how their dad is so antiquated, and he's throwing out all these big words when it's beyond clear that he's just throwing out vague ideas of what they could do rather than what they're actually going to do. I think that ultimately defines the biggest difference between Kendall and Logan and why they are so adversarial towards each other. And Shiv and Roman is constantly throwing like back talk, just like sarcastic phrases, and Connor's just being Connor just randomly throws out. I had it written down here, which is that Kendall starts off as one spiel, which is like, I have this written in a couple of Succession one-liners that I had written down, because I think that's something that we need to do, is just start keeping track of the one-liners as it goes out, because they're too good to not give.
You're right.
To. He's like, big picture, we're at the end of the long American century. Our company is a declining empire inside a declining empire. And Connor just goes, amen, brother. And I'm like, did you even know what he's talking about? Because I sure don't. And I'm like, come on, guy. Like,
that was funny.
But Alan Ruck's just how he delivers there. It just so works so well. And how I love how kind of too, it's like Kendall gives this giant big spiel, and at the end of the day, Alan Ruck is just like, oh yeah, sorry, I'm out. I'm with Dad. Like, he first sees the donuts. He's the only one that like might think that they're like a totally harmless gesture. It's so weird. Like, so break it down. Do you think that Connor is like kind of skepticism towards the sibling? Do you think that Connor is like kind of aloofness just in general? Like where do you think that comes from? Like, because he obviously has to have some perception and understanding of just how awful their family is, but like how he kind of just takes it in stride. Like, where do you think that comes from?
I don't know. I don't know why he hasn't become more cutthroat, but like, I'm confused too by his character, because he is the oldest and he's Logan's first child, obviously. So like, but he's always been kind of like relegated to like being kind of a joke, even to Logan. Like, Logan kind of is referred to him until like these last couple episodes. He's kind of this episode in particular, like he's actually leaned on Connor, but I don't ever think it's going to be a serious role with Connor, in terms of like, they're never going to, put him as a leadership role. I doubt he'll be president on this show, but like, the dynamics he brings to the show is definitely very interesting, especially with the siblings, which he tries to be the mediator, especially when Shiv says that terrible thing to Roman.
Yeah.
and then and then Kendall and Shiv have that moment of bonding, just torturing, like, and just
Yeah.
ridiculing their
And how
brother.
Kendall's just like, oh please, he'll be fine. He'll rub it off. When it's beyond clear that Shiv has actually like hit a sore spot on Roman. And like
Mm,
it's kind of crazy to me how like Roman starts off the show as like the one that's hurling the most insults, but then it's like, oh man, Kendall and Shiv can have that one that just cuts like super deep.
yeah, because like, yeah, he's always been like a dick to them, but like when they say something to him, it's like you said, it's just it really hits to the core.
Right.
And like, yeah, I do feel more and more bad for that character as episodes pass, even though he is like a shitty person. But like, yeah, I still think, the whole thing with Jerry, the way that's going to unravel too, is going to be very interesting to see like how that relationship plays out. And like, yeah, just like that character is super interesting too. Shiv is back on her bullshit again,
Yep.
back on her lying and, not
Yep.
telling people shit.
Well, let's talk about Shiv for a second. Shiv plays like a couple of different like roles and angles in this, right? I ultimately think that even though I think the kind of the main characters, it's a couple major characters. Obviously, the whole thing with Roman and Jerry, Greg, what's it called? Marsha obviously comes back into this episode, and then obviously, but I think Shiv is kind of the focus of this episode, much more so than even last episode, where it
Mhm.
starts off, we see her walking in to meet Kendall. Greg spots her outside again. Just like I love how the writers are consistently putting Greg like just in the right place at the right time. Like he saw Sandy and Stewie at Tom's bachelor party. I was able to figure that out. Obviously with the papers and everything, like it's beyond clear that Greg is like the writer's favorite character. So he sees Shiv walking into the building. Shiv walks in. Kendall at first is trying to pass it off like, oh, I'm what's it called, because you're me or I'm you or something like that. And Kendall's trying to play it off like, oh, he knew that Shiv would come there. When it like Shiv even straight up tells him, was like, yeah, I'm only here to like see what you're gonna do and seeing how that's gonna affect me, And then
Exactly.
obviously with the whole Roman and Connor thing. But then obviously as it goes on, she does for a second seriously consider Kendall's proposal, not for anything that he actually says, because it's beyond clear that Kendall has no idea what he's doing. I think that's the
Mhm.
ultimate summation of what happens here, just with everything that goes down with Kendall in this episode. If we can sum that up, is that this is just kind of his expression of the fact that he has no idea what he's doing.
Mhm.
And Shiv kind of is there to gauge exactly what level it is, gauge and see, okay, even if Kendall doesn't know what he's doing, okay, is there something that I can get out of this? What can I get out of this? That is Shiv's entire arc. And so what kind of comes of it is, okay, she consults with Tom. She has that weird lying back and forth with Tom, who once again is kind of just stuck with Logan. I'm a little bit disconcerted because Tom, outside of like one phone call with Greg this episode, he hasn't had that much to do, but I'm hoping that does amp up.
Yeah.
And then at the end, it's like, of course, the thing that sets it off is just the fact that Kendall once again says that he needs to be boss, and then gives his own reasons why none of them can do it. And I think it's fair enough in Shiv at that point. I think it's constantly ironic that Shiv, as a character, for the longest time, spent her time on the outside of Waystar, working in politics, and then now all of a sudden is so invested in like wanting to be the head, and it's like, for what reasons? Because she's so self-motivated about survival. It's like, wouldn't the
Yeah.
smart thing to try and distance yourself from the company just from like a PR standpoint, if we're going to go
Yeah.
that route,
Which they like alluded to in the first season, if I'm not mistaken. Like that's why she didn't do it to begin with,
Right.
to have more of like a better private life. But she still like sticks her head into the business, even though you're saying Kendall doesn't know what he's doing. She wouldn't know anything even more.
Well,
Like
the
she
only reason
like
why I bring that up is because, like, just
yeah,
grand scale wise, Kendall is trying to think too far in advance, that he's not
yeah.
pausing to stop and consider what's going on in the present. Shiv,
Mm,
all she ever does is takes a day at a time. And that's why, at least seemingly, her long term plans, if any even exist, consistently seem so far out of reach. She consistently reminds me of Cersei Lannister as a character, where within Game of Thrones as a show, Cersei Lannister is this character that seems like this grand overall, like pulling every string behind everything. And then as time goes on and the kind of the layers get pulled back, you realize, okay, she's not nearly as smart as she thinks she is. She's constantly getting one up by everyone around her and constantly having to play kind of the reactionary card,
yes.
and as a result, it kind of diminishes what we originally thought of her. And we're
Mhm.
still so new within Shiv's arc. This is only the third season, that we still have yet to kind of figure out, like, kind of who she is as a character, because she's gone from like kind of being this tertiary force outside the family to being directly involved, to having to like kind of beg for her own place, and now like trying to prove her place, and now she's once again trying to find her stance, find out where best she should be placed within this whole struggle. And the problem is, again, it's what we talked about last week, which is that the lack of kind of a consistent through line throughout it,
Yeah, and just her character, especially after that heart-wrenching scene from Matthew McFadden last, season finale, for her to like make that promise and like, be a better, tell the truth to him. What is she doing? She just keeps lying and just keep going behind his back. And like, and then what was it? This episode, right? Where she was like, I love you. And then she's asking, you love me too, right?
Tom doesn't even give her an answer.
Not immediately, no. But at the end, he's like, I love you. And then she hung up like immediately after, and she didn't say it back.
Right. Exactly.
Which is very telling.
Crazy. That moment was like,
yeah.
Holy, that's like that's scene of the year, like potential, just in general. Like kind of how Tom reacts to that. Like I'm so mad that I feel like they're not using Matthew McFadden to like the best of their ability, because he's been such a staple of the show.
I think he'll be in it more the next few episodes.
I think he will, but like I don't know. Like I just get jealous. I'm a spoiled fan. What can I say? I like what I like. I definitely do. I think the thing to kind of end off with the Shiv thing is kind of how Kendall reacts ultimately when they all make their decisions. Because like the ironic thing is, it's like, okay, like he calls Connor irrelevant, he calls Roman a daddy's boy and a joke, but he goes after Shiv the hardest, which is where like I feel like this is like, of all of Kendall's assholish moments, which again they've been fewer and far between, they haven't been like kind of as obvious as some of the other characters' moments, but like this part hits home. This is like kind of where Kendall reveals his true colors, and it's like, wow, like kind of his kind of entire take towards women just in general, with like probably one of the most offensive like bits that I could have ever seen, where he says yeah, only because you're a girl, the Shiv, girls count double now, didn't you know? It's only your teats that have any value. I don't know how he phrases teats, where it's like he phrases it like an Englishman. I'm like, okay, that was just Jeremy Strong throwing in like kind of his actory bits right there. But I'm like, damn, like went after her this time, just in general. And it's like, it's kind of like a new low, because now he's not even going after her as like his sister. It's just like, okay, you're just invaluable to me. And like, if there was ever going to be like, I love the moment too, how this just says
I think it was well earned though, that moment. As brutal as it was, and as savage as he was, and as Emmy worthy as he was in that. Like, just give him the fucking Emmy again. Can we give him the Emmy?
Seriously.
Just give him the Emmy again.
Words out of my mouth. Can we just give him the Emmy right now?
All right.
Like, the whole thing.
It was well earned, because especially what she's done and said about him, behind him, and to his face. Like, she deserved that. I'm sorry. I mean, he is an asshole, but like, and he might be incompetent, but I'm still rooting for him. I don't care.
But the other thing too is it just illustrates everything about Kendall, and like ultimately why I don't think he's winning this at the end of the day, unless some act of God miracle saves him, is that he is all cordial and respectful until somebody tells him no. And then the minute that happens, he unravels. It's like a child.
But he's not going to like let donuts defeat him at the end of the day.
Right, he's
like
the one
this
guy.
is
like
it's going to be a better season than what this episode is giving us. It's like donuts aren't going to be the last.
I love Roman's line where he's like, "Oh, I'm 98% sure that those aren't poisoned."
Yeah.
Just
that
ridiculous.
Was funny. That was a good line.
Yeah,
I was thinking about that one.
Yeah,
but yeah. Oh, what did you think about the scene where he's like, "Oh, I gotta go hug my kids"? And then
that was okay.
And then he goes outside and sees.
I'm glad you brought that, and we see Stewie. I have a bold proclamation, which is I think
proclamation, prophesize.
Okay, a proclamation, a hypothesis, a guess. Take what word you will. It's that this is the first of only about 2 or 3 times that we probably see Stewie throughout this entire season. I think Stewie and Sandy, they kind of realize that this whole thing happened to their advantage. Arian Moayed is not even given in the main cast this season. He's only guest credited in this episode, along with Hayam Abbas. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like, this move completely benefited them. Like, completely benefited them at the end of the day. Like, because they were trying to do the bear hug last season, and now everything that Kendall has done as far as what he's unveiled, it's like, wow, okay, we're just going to sit back, brush our hands off. We also have the introduction of Hope Davis in this episode, the next of the big guest stars, as the ironically entitled Sandy Jr., also named after her dad.
That's
Sandy.
A funny fucking thing. That's funny.
Oh, man.
That's funny. Hope Davis is a good actress. I hope they do more with her than what this scene was. I feel like we should have had a longer scene than what we got with Stewie and everything. There needs to be a little bit more to that. And I need to know a little bit more about Stewie, too, even though they're just relegating him to guest, I guess, this season. But, like, Yeah, I've always been frustrated since the first episode of this fucking show. I've been frustrated by that character, and I've been frustrated by his motivations, his just motive, anything with motive at the beginning. Okay, because like he's just like supposed to be Kendall's good friend, and then just turns his back on him at every chance he gets, and just ultimately, I'm wondering whether or not if Kendall is planning to, team up with Stewie in order to like officially backstab him, and then for better measure, fucking backstab Stewie as well,
Right.
and then maybe get back in the good graces or have like some respect from his dad, since that is his
Right.
rival. So that's my theory
Yeah,
about that.
Stewie as a character has consistently befuddled me, which is that at one moment he's told that he's Kendall's friend, and then at the next minute it's like, oh, he backstabs him. Like Stewie ultimately is shown to be a character that is only out for himself, but then he approaches Kendall with the idea of bear hugging, right? It's confusing because we don't. Oh, the biggest thing for me about Stewie is how much of it is himself and how much of it is Sandy pushing him, right? Like how much like that. That's kind of where the confusion around Stewie as a character comes from. It's like, is he motivated only by money? Is he motivated a little bit by greed? Does he want a stake in Waystar? Does he want to just kind of like be on the board? What really goes on with Kendall? Like, is this another one of those friendships where it's like they say they're friends, but they really aren't? Like,
Yeah.
that's what kind of throws me off about Stewie. But ultimately, I think that in a weird way, like, it's strange because he's up to main cast status in season 2, but he's in it a lot less than he is in season 1.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so this is so Stewie as a character is only like a plot device. That's where this is gonna go. Okay. And I love the Trojan horse bit too. Like, what did you think that Trojan horse bit? Do you think that was do you think that was like had any actual meaning, or do you think that was just like Stewie?
Yeah, that's a dude. As soon as I saw that horse, I was like, "Is that Trojan horse?" And then the character said Trojan horse, and I was just like, fucking, what's the point of this? It's just like, I don't know. It's just him being a pretentious dick, and like they had a funny joke. What was the line he said? Where it's just like he said something. Oh yeah, I was going to give you a dead horse's head, but you wouldn't believe the paperwork. Like that was the funniest Stewie line I think of the history of
Up
the
there,
character.
definitely up there.
Yeah.
But yes, so Stewie ultimately going to be a non sequitur this season, which is unfortunate because even though his
Yeah, because he was
using,
busy filming Spider-Man.
right, for all the 2 seasons he's going to be in it. Crazy world, right?
I know, right? He's in the MCU.
Arian
Stewie's in the
Boyad,
MCU.
Stewie in the MCU. Crazy. I wonder what other HBO stars will be able to. Well, no, Peter Dinklage too, because Peter Dinklage is in Infinity War. But
Well,
yeah,
that's true.
yeah, a couple other one-liners that I wanted to throw out real quick. Tom, at the beginning when he in his phone call with Greg, you better find an animal's corpse to crawl into and hide. Loki, Star Wars reference, not quite sure, but it was in response to saying that Logan was going to shove a bunch of, what was it, spiders up his dick hole or
Up his
something.
dicky.
Oh, that's the one. That's the one. But yeah, ultimately, let's
Well,
focus
yeah,
on,
it's the same idea.
yeah, let's talk about Greg for a little bit in this episode, where Greg.
Dude, what is Greg doing, dude? He's trying to get a lawyer on his own. Like he didn't believe Kendall, I guess, in the beginning, even though he sounded super
Well, it's
believable.
not even that he didn't believe him. It's that he was. It's that he's scared. He thinks that Kendall's delusional, and he's not entirely off. Is the thing.
I guess, but like it still didn't make much sense to me that he was clinging on to him. And then he gets the Judas question, which is a reasonable question, the way Greg is acting. And then Greg is going to his grandpa, played by a great James Cromwell performance yet again. And yeah, and then we get to see Peter Riegert from Animal House,
Yes.
fucking as the lawyer. I was like, that's Peter Riegert, right? I was like, yeah, it is. And then yeah, that was great too, seeing him, but he's so confused. Everything Greg
with hippie hair.
Yeah, I know, right? He looks cool. But like everything Greg has said this season, 98% of it has been nonsense.
Yeah.
Like last episode, I didn't mention like when he was in the car, like describing like the social media, what was happening on social media. Like he didn't make any sense for that. They're like, so that means like he's nuts this season. He has no idea what to think. I don't know if he's going to be level-headed until maybe the finale of the season. I don't know what's going on with him. Maybe we have to watch. He's still really funny and interesting to watch, but I want him and Tom together more. I miss that duo. Maybe
Yeah,
that's just me.
definitely there was a special kind of magic that came from Greg and Tom, Nicholas Braun and Matthew McFadden together, obviously. But the whole thing there is I think we're still in the early stages of Greg's kind of arc just in general. Obviously, his grandfather is trying to manipulate him and court him and push him a little bit. I love how this was just like their chance of like the writers directly taking shots at like those types of people, like the type of person that James Cromwell plays in the show, the type of person that Ewan is. But I love too, like kind of the initial scene um, with his friend in his apartment, and they're just sharing beers, and he's just like, "Yeah, can you give me legal advice?" And she's like, "What, in her first semester of college?"
Yeah.
And then fucking, and then the one, and then she's like, "Do you want me to call my professor?"
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, yeah.
He's like, "Yes, please." And then the Waystar lawyer shows up, and in like one of the most strangely, brilliantly written scenes, quite possibly of the season, we're only 2 episodes in, where the lawyer shows up. Greg is like directly talking, like trying to get a straight answer from him, and the lawyer like is just asking around and like kind of acting like the cool guy, but also like purposefully dodging all of Greg's questions, but in like a super charming way. It's like, oh man, like how far deep in is Greg here? Like ultimately, I'm not gonna say that Greg made the wrong call. I think he definitely made the right call trying to seek independent advice outside of like obviously Waystar, but also of Kendall, because as Kendall proved in this episode, he's still not quite like on the right path. Definitely, I think it's a very telling sign. The ending shot with Kendall when he goes to see Sana Lathan and her team of lawyers in the office, and he's in like the baseball cap and sunglasses, like so nobody recognizes him. Like that's a very telling sign to me. But is Greg going through James Cromwell and Peter Rieger going to be the right call? Who knows? I think that's one of those things that's still too soon to tell.
I'm also never been sure what James Cromwell's motive
Right.
is either, because
Right.
like he doesn't get along with his brother, yet he still kind of backs his brother up because he's never been on Kendall's side, not
Right.
even once,
It's
not
like he
even
hates
from the
it's like
first season,
it's
from
just
the
like
first
everyone
episode or
hates
whatever.
it's like no matter how much of a piece of shit Logan is, for whatever reason, everybody hates Kendall more. Is it just because they see that Kendall has the potential to be worse than Logan, or is it just because of like the typical
I
like,
think
oh,
they
we have no
just
faith
see
in him because
him.
he's an idiot?
No, I don't think they think he's an idiot. I just think they think he's entitled and spoiled, and they just don't want him to have it because he thinks he should have it, which maybe he does, maybe he doesn't deserve it, but that's the point of the show, is to just make up your mind about these, morally despicable characters, but it's so fun and engaging and addictive to watch. But yeah, I just never been sure about what James Cromwell's motive is. Like, what is his end goal with getting Nicholas Braun, Peter Riegert as the lawyer? Like, what is he trying to do? Is he
I believe
trying
the
to
line that he says is what, expose the fastidious nature of the capitalist enterprise in America or something along
Yeah, but,
those
like,
lines.
what does that even mean, though? Like,
That's
is
what
he
I'm saying.
is that trying to be like Brian, like, I wanna get after my brother, or,
That's what I'm
like,
saying. Like
I don't
I
really
feel
get
like
it.
this entire episode, the biggest thing was, and this is again part of the brilliance of it, but was just dropping big words in order to cover for the fact that it's like, wow, none of these guys really know what they're doing. Like at
And
this point,
another great scene was when the siblings were all talking, and they were like, "Alright, let's talk about brass tacks. Did we know what was going on? Yes or no?"
yeah, let's talk
That
about that
that
scene.
was a great scene.
Like as just like a statement on like, okay, how culpable certain rich people in the bourgeoisie
Yeah.
are when it comes to these types of innocence. Okay, interesting, like experimental as far as that goes. But like once the siblings kind of broke it down, like I don't know, like what do you think of like kind of how their performances each kind of attributed, like what they may have each know? Like Kendall's very upfront and obvious about, okay, they knew. Shiv is very adamant they didn't know. Roman is kind of like 50-50. Connor like is just kind of like accepted it and moved on and just trying to pretend like it's not as big a deal as it really is. Like obviously how that kind of marks like how distinctly separate the four of them are. But like, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, it's like, yeah, obviously we know that it's a sign that like they're
I
the
think
fact that yeah,
Kendall and Roman really are, if they want to admit it or not, they are on the same page of that. Connor's in his own bubble, and Shiv, maybe she's telling the truth, but she knows more than what she's leading on to. I feel like maybe she doesn't know as much as Kendall and Roman, but I feel like she knows, because like Kendall and Roman were in Hollywood or whatever, and they knew about, they were talking about like the movies, Harvey Weinstein kind of shit.
right,
So it's like she didn't really know about that because she wasn't in on the company. She shouldn't
right.
run the company. Get out of here. Go back to politics. What are you doing? Go be a wife. All right. Be a good wife to your husband. Okay. That's my advice to her. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like they all knew more than what they let on. That's my point about that.
Yeah, ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that that's kind of I don't know. Like I'm confused by Kendall's need to like expose like make the company morally sound when he clearly like has no intention of that. Like that's the part that confused me. I'm like, okay, is that just more of his delusion as far as like, oh, okay, like we did all these bad things, but we have to like, you know, sum it up in like this big redemptive act in order to bring it together, you know, like what's going on there just in general, you know?
Yeah, he has to figure out like what exactly they will do in order to like, make up for all the wrongdoings, besides going after the dad. Like like what is his ultimate like thing? That's my main confusion about what Kendall is ultimately doing. I like that like how he's going to get to where he wants to be. Like I know where he wants to be, but I don't know how he wants to get there or how he thinks he's going to get out of this hole. But that's what's so cool about this show, because the show will surprise us and be like, "Oh yeah, he could do that." But he's going to do something, or someone else is going to do something that's going to catch us completely off guard, and like just great show.
Yeah. Couple more moments that we got to get through before we get out of
Yes.
here. Roman and Jerry, I want to talk about that for a second
Yes.
before we end it with Logan. What's it called? Roman and Jerry, this entire episode, like, is like this just as like the cultivating of their relationship. It plays into my theory last week that this is going to be a very Roman centric season. Like Jerry, it's funny because I thought that like Logan was going to be the one to like send Roman to Alexander Skarsgård this season, but it might be Jerry ultimately, because obviously Jerry is like kind of settling in the rich seat. I love like just as marking the distinct difference between Jerry and Roman, and like kind of what it is that they see each other, where Jerry is so experienced and knows how to handle herself in these types of situations, and Roman is still so new and so relatively immature. But like kind of the back and forth between them, where she's like, okay, I understand that like I work in a terrible position and what I've done is awful, but like, hey, I still have this one proud moment that I can send to my daughters ultimately, you know, like just something to be proud of just in that sense. And then when Roman shows up to the meeting and then calls Jerry about it, like, I think that scene in particular is one of the more well-written scenes in the episode, just as far as dialogue goes, because the back and forth between them, where it's like Roman is confessing, but he's also saying, oh, I'm just here finding out what's going on with Kendall. But at the same time, like, you know, kind of probing her, like finding out what the advice is.
That was great.
That was so good.
No, when he was like, all right, when she threatens him and he's like, all right, Jerry, I don't have time to jack off right now. Like,
incredible. That whole exchange was amazing. Where I'm just like, wow, okay, just as far as illustrating, just like
I'm not gonna lie, Kieran Culkin has like been like from these two episodes has
really
been my favorite supporting player.
Yeah, he's been the MVP so far of this season.
He's been the MVP so far.
Yeah.
There's still 7 juicy episodes left.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
But he's hosting SNL too next week, which I'm psyched for personally.
Wow. I still continue to question how you find that show funny, or how you're able to watch
There's
that show.
There's funny moments of this show. Yeah, sure.
All right. But I mean, I'm sure Kieran will be a good host. But ultimately, I think that again, like just the other thing too that I love about this show, just in general, is the different styles of acting that they're able to bring and how they're able to mark. Like you see the interviews with these guys, they all have like such distinctly different backgrounds. Where Cox and McFadden are obviously classically theater trained. Snook has clearly been acting, you know, as you know, Snook and Culkin have like the child acting aspect. Culkin is such this crazy improvisational artist.
Sarah Snook a child actress?
Yeah, she was. Apparently, she was doing an interview with Seth Meyers the other night. She was talking about how she won like a Meryl Streep Theater Award, something like that, when she was like 6 or something like that.
Yeah,
so,
she
like,
had to have been in theater too. Yeah,
yeah,
she's
absolutely.
fucking great. Yeah, she's so
just
good.
an incredible actress. Like it's an incredible cast just in general around, and like Alan Ruck with more of like kind of the blend between like the improvisational and like more kind of
he's
direct
theater too,
and then Jeremy Strong with just like the such deep like what's like the character oh my god, what's the term that I'm method acting style where he's just like so deep and serious with how he takes everything. Like
he maced himself for Trial of the Chicago 7.
That was wild.
Why did he do that?
No, he's insane.
There's not even a scene of him getting maced in that movie.
I don't get it.
Why did he do that?
Like, he wanted to feel and understand.
Dude, I gotta understand him, man. He was great in that movie.
Yeah. Everyone was great in that movie.
Yeah.
But like and like I just love how each and every single person is able to kind of bring their own distinct styles to the show, and it helps. And it helps kind of craft the identity of it even more. But I love the moment too between Jerry and Roman, where she's like, you know, she kind of like Roman kind of expresses like what would happen if the possibility of Kendall and them getting together would be. And she's like, you're all too dysfunctional. Nothing would happen. You would all kind of like zero each other out. And she knows that Sandy's involved. So she's like, yeah, ultimately at the end of the day, even if they were able to get a position, nobody picks. It's Snake Linguini. I don't really know what that means, but it was just a great line just in general. She kind of like, and Roman does take this away from the fact that it's like, okay, under Kendall, they will consistently be fighting with each other for the top spot, and that doesn't help or benefit anyone, and it only gives their enemies, because ultimately, at the end of the day, Sandy is still an enemy of the company, more of the benefit, versus at the very least with Logan in the top spot, at least for right now, there's some sort of like still chance for stability just in general. And then obviously Jerry reminds him, it's like, yeah, but you could also, you don't want me as an enemy, essentially.
Mhm.
And like, is that the first real moment that like Jerry like has where she like kind of threatens Roman, if anything? Because everything between them has been like, well, not cordial, but like as cordial as it could possibly be up until this point, I feel.
I feel like she's threatened him before, but in lesser circumstances. Like, like when they were like first, like interacting more that we saw. Like
Yeah.
she was kind of like oh stop kind of like behavior kind of thing. But like
Right.
no, she is kind of serious now. She was kind of serious with Greg in the first season too. If I remember correctly, as well, between that whole thing between her and Tom and Greg. I
Oh
remember
man.
her being really stern with Greg as
Yeah.
well. No, she's great too, that actress. I was thinking this the other day. Is J. Smith Cameron just Sydney Sweeney if she figured out time travel? That's my fucking point about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's of all kind of the 6 degrees of actors that you've done, that might be the most wild one yet.
Yeah.
But there's a reason. Of all that I'll say to that is there's a
She
reason
looks like
why.
an older Sydney Sweeney. I'm sorry. Whatever.
Almost like the only thing that I'm gonna say to that is there's a
Telling you.
reason why certain actors are prominent and able to have their moment in certain times, and it is certainly something interesting when J. Smith Cameron and Sydney Sweeney are both obviously two like the biggest actresses in general right now for respective different reasons. But for I don't know, that's an interesting point. I'll have to get back to you on that one. Last big thing that I really want to talk about. Well, also real quick, just general, what thoughts on the whole Roman Jerry ship thing? Just in general, like I don't know, like I enjoy their relationship, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, do we still need more of this? That's another thing that seems to be
Roman
popping
and
up on TV a
Jerry.
lot.
Yeah, I don't know if we're ever really gonna if they're really gonna pop that cherry. But if they do, I feel like it'll be way more it'll be done more respectfully and pleasantly than, let's say, Ozark,
Right.
which
Yeah.
was oh no.
Ugh. Just one of many problems that I had.
Grody.
One of many problems that I had with that third season.
Hey
Just
man, what if the old lady banged Charlie Tan?
what a revolutionary idea.
Bro.
But like, and here's the thing, like
I'm a bag of dicks.
I'm not opposed to that, but it's like, where does it even come? What is the storytelling? What is the motivation? It clearly just is like, okay, we have nothing to do with these two characters. We just need to give them something to do. Ultimately, that brings us into our last point. Ultimately,
Logan.
you want to talk about sleeping around Logan and how this is probably the most vulnerable that we've seen the old man for the entirety of the show. Ultimately, like, would you say?
Yeah, because it's definitely probably the most because we've seen him vulnerable a couple times, maybe with his kids a couple times. The finale of last season with he was gonna throw Tom under the bus, but then
Yeah.
Shiv came in and he's like, "Okay, honey, okay, my favorite one, I'm Brian Cox." Anyway, fuck off. Anyway, no, well, I with Masha coming back and like she was really pissed that he fucked Holly Hunter, so. Yeah, so like she just wants money, 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 money.
It's
Yeah, and that's pretty much her character this season, I guess.
Yeah, and it's disappointing. Like, I don't know. I think the Marsha character, the Hayama Boss character, is probably I think one of the biggest tragedies of the show just to come out because like
Yeah,
the strange thing is it's what kind of kicks off the entire show is her, which is the crux of like, okay,
she was a big part of season 1.
right, like that's
Yeah.
the whole motivation to try and like as for Logan to get Kendall to sign is the fact that he doesn't read over the trust, which is where he's making Marsha the
Mm,
prime recipient ultimately, and that's the fact that Kendall doesn't even read the document before he signs, and that's kind of the telltale sign for Logan that he's not he's not it ultimately. And then the entire season, you have this back and forth about whether Marsha is the one kind of motivating Logan or whether it is just his own debilitating health. And then that greatly decreases in season 2. It's another one of those instances where it's like, okay, the writers have this one idea for this character, but then as the show kind of shifts and evolves into the form that like kind of the mass populace deems it to be, it's like so they phase out certain characters, right? And Marsha to me is ultimately a big, I think one of the, what's it called? One of the, oh my God, what's the word that I'm looking for? One of the part of the fallout from that, because you have the entire
blankets.
you have the Rhea Jarrell fallout from last season, and the only thing that she ultimately serves is I'm mad because you cheated on me, and it's like, really? That's your entire arc? Yeah, I thought that the whole thing was you were supposed to be above this, and then when they bring her back in, ultimately, it's like, okay, I'm not even going to negotiate. I'm going to have my lawyer negotiate with Fisher Stevens, and then I'm just going to go and comfort Logan. And, like, they seem to find some mutual comfort in the sense of, like, oh, man,
Yeah.
Logan's kids. All
Let me
they're doing is
hire a
causing trouble for him.
condescending lawyer to talk to my husband and be like, these might sound like big numbers now.
But that's the crazy thing. She doesn't even talk to him. She talks
I know,
to
it's
the
the
Fisher Stevens
lawyer.
character.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's kind of where that comes in. And it's like, oh, okay, is this going to, like, so she's kind of there to like almost substantiate Logan just in general, which is crazy because Logan to me, I think it's interesting, right? That we start off where season 1, he's kind of semi-dependent on her. And then season 2, he starts to get a little bit big for his britches ultimately. But I think at the end of the day, it does serve to illustrate why Logan, at least for now, still has the leg up on Kendall, which is that he was kind of blindsided, but now he's back and ready to go, which is that I feel like Logan is ultimately, at the end of the day, a lot more stable than Kendall is. Obviously, he's a ruthless prick, but he's a guy who, at the end of the day, gets shit done. And when he knows that, and when he needs to focus, he knows how to focus, ultimately. Like, that's kind of the ultimate kind of compartmentalization, and it shows when obviously they have the photo shoot at the end, right, with kind of everyone kind of rejoining back together, right? Obviously, you know, the thing with Roman, the thing with Shiv not even bothering to get out of the car. I love the visual cue of Tom in the backseat with Shiv and then getting out and moving to the front seat because he wants to sit in the back with her. Like, he has everything calculated. He's ready for war. He knows what happens next. But I don't know. Like, Logan has always been a character for me on this entire show that I've gone back and forth. I went from kind of thinking he was just 50-50. I thought he had an outstanding debut in the first episode to being really back and forth throughout the rest of the season. Like, okay, is he unstable or is he still in the game? And then season 2, he's for the most part spot on. Obviously with the bore on the floor moment, and then obviously with the affair with Rhea. And then at the end, that brilliant moment where he almost has the brief smile when he sees Kendall, obviously at the press conference. And now it's like, this is the first time that we kind of see him undefeated. He's kind of reserved. He's kind of figuring out what his next step is. And now whatever the case is going to be, he knows what he's going to do next, ultimately. At least we hope. But who knows? Because at the end of the day, this is Logan, and Logan does what Logan does, ultimately. You got any thoughts on Logan before we wrap up and get out of here?
Ruthless SOB. I think
L to the OG.
L to the OG, dude be the OG, and he playing. Yeah. I still think Kendall is definitely very similar to his father, and I still think he's trying, his hardest, his damnedest to, make it there. And I still think, despite him, going all savage mode, beast mode, world star mode on his, siblings, I think they kind of deserved it. And they pushed him to the limit, and they were just being so they were spooked by donuts, dude. And that's what set him off, dude, was the fact that they were fucking spooked by donuts. And I agree. And I still think, maybe this won't be the last we see him break down, but I still think he's still in this. And I still think this is going to be kind of an even war. And I can't wait to see more. Hell yeah.
Indeed. Ultimately. So final score for this episode. This was, for me, still not as good as the outstanding debut, but definitely a good setup for what was to come.
Strong 4.
4. Yeah, I'm going to go the same. 4 out of 5, ultimately. As far as where we could go, again, this episode ended on a pretty close note. Ultimately, the only big thing, obviously, was Kendall in the Sana Lathan's office. And so the only thing that I saw for the feature right for next week is some sort of press conference, ultimately. I don't know if we're going to get anything super big next week, but again, all I'm going to say is bring on those guest stars, baby. That's all that I'm going to say.
Or more Dasha at the very least.
Absolutely. Indeed. So that was it. That was this week's recap of Succession. Keep tuning in on Thursdays going forward for the Succession recap as we recap all 9 episodes throughout
Next
this
week.
season.
Next week is Kathy Yan's.
Oh, that's gonna be
directorial.
interesting.
Will it?
Yeah, well, we're gonna see after. Well, again, we got another big guest star, obviously from like kind of the 2019 to 2020 season. Lorena Scafaria, director of Hustlers, will be directing 2 episodes this season. So
I can't wait. This is
gonna be a very director-filled
good.
season. I feel like kind of one of the later seasons of The Sopranos when they would bring on all those guest directors, like in season 5 when they had Peter Bogdanovich and Mike Figgis direct episodes.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Bogdanovich, that was another great Sopranos character.
Yeah, right? Dr. Kupferberg.
Bogdanovich. He was great. Yeah.
Absolutely. So keep tuning in next week for the Succession Corner. Ultimately, I'm going to keep brainstorming titles. There'll be a title eventually as we continue to recap season 3. Dustin, where can the good people find you on the interwebs?
They can find me on Mr. G Movie Reviews on YouTube. They can find me on Letterboxd, Dustin Mason. And they can find me on Twitter, Duster.
I just wanted to read off a couple more one-liners that there were 2 one-liners that I missed in the one-liners recap as we were going throughout it, which is what's it called? Greg saying, "I'm not involved necessarily." Roman saying, "A spontaneous outpouring of thoroughly lawyered emotion." And then Shiv at the end saying, "Fuck you, plastic Jesus." I don't even know what that means, but I'm with it because that is amazing, ultimately. And of course, you can follow me at Talking TV Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram. But be sure to continue to support the channel. Click the subscribe button, click the like button, click the bell next to it to get notified every time we put up new content. Leave a comment in the comment section below to let us know what your thoughts are on our Succession recap as we continue to go throughout. In the meantime, people, that's it. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.